Girl vanished from her bed in 1991. 9 years later, mom plays her old recording toy. It was the summer of 1991, and life in the small town was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of town where everybody knew everybody else, where neighbors waved from their porches, and where children rode their bicycles freely down long empty streets. In one of the houses at the edge of town lived a woman named Linda and her 6-year-old daughter, Emily. To most people, they seemed like any ordinary family. Linda worked at the local grocery store and spent most of her evenings at home, making sure Emily was fed, tucked into bed, and read her favorite bedtime story. Emily was a bright child, full of questions about the world, always carrying her little recorder toy around to capture sounds she liked. Sometimes she recorded her laughter, sometimes the barking of the neighbor's dog, and sometimes her mother's voice reading bedtime stories. On the night of August 17, Linda prepared Emily for bed like she had done every evening before. Dinner was finished, dishes washed, and pajamas laid out. Emily climbed into her small wooden bed, clutching her stuffed bunny. The little girl asked for one more story, and Linda smiled, sitting at the edge of the bed. She read slowly, letting her voice fill the room, while Emily's eyelids grew heavy. Before turning off the lamp, Linda leaned down and kissed her daughter on the forehead. Emily smiled drowsily and whispered good night. It was such a normal night, nothing about it seemed different. Linda didn't know it was the last time she would see her daughter peacefully asleep in that bed. When morning light came through the curtains, Linda woke up as usual. She made coffee and prepared breakfast. She called out to Emily, expecting the sound of small footsteps running down the hall. But there was no answer. Linda frowned and walked to her daughter's room, gently knocking on the door before opening it. At first, she thought Emily might still be asleep, but the bed was empty. The blanket was half on the floor, the pillow slightly shifted, and the window was cracked open more than usual. At first, Linda thought maybe Emily had woken early and gone into the yard to play, something she occasionally liked to do. She stepped outside, calling her daughter's name. No answer. The yard was still, the swing set in the corner unmoving. Panic began to rise slowly in Linda's chest. She checked every corner of the house again, even small spaces like closets and under the bed, places where children sometimes like to hide. Emily was nowhere to be found. Linda's hands shook as she reached for the phone. She called her sister first, asking if Emily had perhaps wandered over early in the morning. Her sister said no. Within minutes, Linda called the local authorities, her voice trembling as she explained that her daughter was missing from her bed. Police officers arrived quickly, asking questions, walking through the house, and checking the yard. Neighbors soon gathered outside, whispering, their faces full of concern. In a small town like theirs, news traveled fast. By mid-morning, nearly everyone knew that Emily was gone. The search began immediately. Officers walked up and down the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen a little girl with brown hair in her pajamas. Volunteers gathered to help, forming lines to comb through the fields and wooded areas around the edge of town. Helicopters flew overhead while dogs searched the ground. Linda stood by her front porch, watching the crowd of people moving in every direction, her heart heavy with fear but her mind refusing to accept the possibility that Emily could really be gone. Every hour that passed felt like a year. Linda replayed the night over and over in her head, searching for anything unusual. She remembered hearing the crickets outside, the hum of the ceiling fan, the soft sound of Emily's breathing as she drifted off to sleep. Nothing had felt wrong. Nothing had warned her. Yet somehow, her daughter had vanished without a trace between night and morning. As days passed, the town grew restless. Posters with Emily's picture appeared on telephone poles, store windows, and church notice boards. Strangers who had never met Linda before came by to drop off food, candles, and words of support. The community was shaken to its core. For years, parents in that town had left their doors unlocked, trusting in the safety of their neighborhood. That trust was broken now, replaced by caution and fear. People kept their children closer. Neighbors locked their windows at night. For Linda, life became a blur of questions and waiting. She sat in her living room surrounded by toys, clothes, and drawings Emily had made. The little recorder toy lay silent on the shelf, its batteries long dead, but Linda could not bring herself to throw it away. Every corner of the house reminded her of her daughter. She could almost hear her laughter echoing down the hallway, almost see her running across the yard. Each day without answers felt like a wound that would not close. The police worked tirelessly at first, knocking on doors, following every tip, and interviewing anyone who might have seen something. But as weeks turned into months, the search slowed down. Leads grew cold. The posters faded in the sun and rain. Slowly, the town moved forward, though it carried a scar. For Linda, time stood still. She refused to change Emily's room. The bed remained neatly made, the bunny still resting on the pillow, as though waiting for her to return. At night, Linda would sit by the window, staring out into the darkness, whispering her daughter's name. She held on to hope with a strength that seemed impossible. Others told her gently that she needed to accept what had happened, but Linda couldn't. Deep in her heart, she felt Emily was still out there somewhere. She believed one day she would know the truth, no matter how long it took. The mystery of that night in 1991 would never leave the town, but for Linda it became the center of her life. Each year she lit a candle on Emily's birthday, whispering a prayer into the silence. Though the years passed, her love did not weaken. Every small sound in the house made her listen carefully. Every knock on the door made her heart race. She lived with the hope that one day, somehow, the quiet of that night would speak, and she would understand how her daughter disappeared. And so, in that small town, the story of Emily's vanishing became both a haunting memory and an unanswered question. A mother's love kept it alive, waiting for the day when the silence would finally break, and the truth would return with it. The weeks after Emily's disappearance slowly turned into months. The search that had once been loud and full of movement became quieter. The volunteers who had filled the fields went back to their jobs and families. The posters with Emily's picture grew weathered, curling at the edges, the colors fading in the sun. The helicopters stopped flying overhead, and the dogs no longer searched the woods. For many people in the town, life had to go on. They wanted to believe that they had done what they could, and now they returned to their routines. But for Linda, time seemed frozen. Every day was the same weight pressing down on her heart. She could not escape the silence left behind in her home. She kept Emily's room exactly as it had been that night in 1991. The little wooden bed was neatly made, the stuffed bunny still resting on the pillow. Emily's small shoes stayed lined up by the door, untouched. Linda couldn't bring herself to pack anything away. She told herself that if Emily ever came home, she would want to find her room just the way she remembered it. Friends gently suggested that keeping everything the same might make it harder to heal, but Linda didn't listen. To her, it wasn't about healing. It was about holding on. The community, while kind, slowly began to change its rhythm. In the first year, people came often to visit Linda. They brought food, candles, and prayers. They sat with her in the evenings and listened as she talked about Emily, about her laughter, about the way she used to hum songs while drawing. But as the years passed, the visits grew less frequent. New families moved into town. New stories took the attention of neighbors. Some people avoided Linda altogether, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know what to say anymore. The sorrow felt too heavy, and they worried that their words would not be enough. Linda didn't blame them. She knew her life had become a shadow of what it once was. She went to work, she came home, she cooked small meals that she rarely finished, and then she sat quietly in the living room, surrounded by memories. The walls felt heavier every year, filled with silence that only she could hear. To keep from breaking under the weight of that silence, she found small rituals that gave her comfort. One of those rituals was listening to the cassette tapes Emily had recorded on her toy recorder. Emily had loved that recorder. She used to carry it around, pressing the red button to capture silly songs, sounds of the birds outside, and her mother's voice reading bedtime stories. Linda had saved those tapes carefully, storing them in a small box in the closet. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was too quiet, she would take one out, put it into her old cassette player, and press play. At first, it was painful to hear Emily's voice again. The sound of her laughter, her high-pitched humming, and the little stories she made up brought tears to Linda's eyes every time. But over time, listening became a way of keeping her daughter close. Linda would close her eyes and imagine that Emily was right there in the room, playing with her toys, asking for another story before bed. Those recordings became precious treasures, the closest thing Linda had to her child. Year after year, Linda clung to hope. Every time the phone rang, she wondered if it would be news. Every time the doorbell sounded, her heart leapt for a moment, thinking maybe, just maybe, Emily would be standing there. She followed news stories of missing children found years later, hoping one day her daughter's story would be among them. She never gave up, even when others gently told her it might be time to let go. The passing years were marked by small, painful traditions. On Emily's birthday, Linda baked a small cake, even if no one came to share it. She placed a candle on top and whispered a wish into the quiet room, asking for her daughter to be safe, wherever she was. On holidays, she set a place at the table for Emily, her heart aching at the empty chair. Sometimes, she even bought small gifts, wrapping them carefully and placing them in Emily's room, imagining the smile that would have lit up her daughter's face. Linda's hope sometimes wavered, but it never disappeared completely. There were nights when she sat by the window, staring into the darkness, and asked herself hard questions. Could her daughter really still be alive after so many years? Was she chasing something impossible? But then she would remember Emily's laughter, her sparkling eyes, and the warmth of her small hand in her own. That memory gave her strength. She told herself that as long as she lived, she would never stop waiting. The police, over the years, checked in less and less. New cases filled their desks, new emergencies demanded their attention. Sometimes, an officer would stop by to ask if Linda had heard anything or seen anything unusual, but most of the time, the visits were short and without answers. Linda knew the case had gone cold. She knew she was the only one still keeping the flame alive. But she didn't care. For her, Emily wasn't a case file or a faded poster. She was her daughter. By the 9th year, Linda's world was quiet, almost unbearably so. She still went to work, but people noticed she smiled less. She spoke little, moving through her days like someone carrying an invisible weight. At night, she returned to her house that felt more like a museum of memories than a home. Yet she refused to leave, even when relatives urged her to move somewhere fresh, somewhere without so many reminders. She insisted that if Emily ever came back, she needed to find her mother in the same place, waiting. It was during one of those quiet evenings, 9 years after the disappearance, that Linda began to clean Emily's room. She wasn't planning to change it, only to dust and tidy. As she opened boxes and shifted toys, she found the old recorder that Emily had carried everywhere. It was tucked beneath some books, dusty and silent. Linda sat on the edge of the bed, holding it in her hands. It had been years since she had touched the little device. She remembered the way Emily used to sing into it, giggling at how funny her voice sounded when it played back. Linda went to the kitchen, found some new batteries, and carefully placed them inside. She pressed the play button, expecting to hear old songs and silly chatter, nothing more. The tape inside whirred softly, and then, through the static, came the sound of Emily's young voice. Linda's eyes filled with tears as she listened, clutching the recorder close. She thought she knew every recording by heart, but this one was different. Emily's tone was softer, almost as if she were whispering. What Linda heard that night would change everything she thought she knew about that summer evening in 1991. Linda sat on the edge of Emily's small wooden bed, her hands trembling as she held the recorder. The familiar whirring sound of the cassette filled the quiet room, and then Emily's young voice broke through the static. It was like stepping back in time, as though the walls of the room had shifted and Emily was there again, sitting cross-legged on the floor, speaking into her toy with that playful seriousness only children could manage. At first, Linda smiled softly through her tears as she listened to the ordinary sounds. Emily was singing a little tune, one she used to hum often while coloring. Then came giggles, the kind that rang like little bells, so bright and pure. Linda's heart ached, but she was grateful. She thought this would be one more recording she would play over and over, just to keep the sound of her daughter alive. But as the tape continued, Linda noticed something unusual. Emily's tone shifted. It was no longer playful or light. Her voice grew quieter, almost as if she was whispering into the recorder so no one else would hear. Linda leaned closer, straining to catch every word. On the tape, Emily spoke in broken sentences, words that sounded hurried. "I don't like him. He was here again. Don't tell Mom. He said it's our secret." The words were faint, but Linda's chest tightened as she listened. She pressed rewind and played it again, this time with her hand gripping the recorder so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The more she listened, the more her heart pounded. Emily mentioned a name. It was soft, almost drowned by the faint hum of background noise, but it was there. A name that Linda recognized instantly. It was the name of a man who had lived only a few streets away back in 1991. He had been part of the neighborhood, someone everyone knew by sight. He had helped at community events, had waved from his front porch. But what struck Linda now was the memory that he had moved away shortly after Emily's disappearance. At the time, it had seemed like coincidence. Now, with Emily's voice whispering his name, it no longer felt that way. Linda felt her breath catch. She sat frozen, replaying the tape again and again, making sure she hadn't imagined it. But there was no mistake. Emily's little voice was clear, and the uneasiness in her tone was undeniable. Linda's eyes filled with tears, her mind racing with questions. Why had Emily recorded this? What had she been trying to tell? Could this be the clue she had been waiting for all these years? For 9 long years, Linda had lived with silence, with unanswered questions. Now, in her hands, was her daughter's voice breaking through that silence. It was like Emily herself was reaching out across time, leaving behind a message to be found when it was needed most. That night, Linda barely slept. She sat at the kitchen table, the recorder in front of her, replaying the tape again and again. She wrote down every word she could hear, every pause, every faint sound. She felt both hope and fear rising inside her. If the name on the tape truly meant something, then perhaps the case could be reopened. Perhaps someone would finally listen again. Perhaps she was closer to the truth than she had ever been. The next morning, Linda walked into the police station, the recorder clutched tightly in her bag. The officers there were surprised to see her, but they recognized her immediately. Over the years, she had become a familiar face, often checking in, asking if there was any new development. They usually had little to offer. But this time was different. Linda placed the recorder on the desk and explained what she had found. At first, the officer on duty seemed doubtful. It was, after all, a child's toy recording from nearly a decade earlier. But when Linda pressed play, the sound of Emily's voice filled the room, fragile yet clear. The officer leaned in, listening closely. When the name was spoken, his expression changed. He sat up straighter, and for the first time in years, Linda saw recognition flicker in someone else's eyes. They took the recorder into evidence, promising to analyze it carefully. Linda left the station with her heart racing. She didn't know what would come of it, but she knew she had done the right thing. She had carried Emily's voice back into the world, refusing to let it fade into silence. Days turned into weeks as the police worked quietly behind the scenes. With new technology available that hadn't existed in 1991, they were able to clean up the recording, making Emily's words clearer. The name, once faint and whispered, now rang sharp and undeniable. It was enough to spark new interest in the case. Investigators began revisiting old files, re-interviewing people who had lived in the neighborhood at the time. Linda felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: momentum. For so long, it had been like shouting into the wind, her pleas unheard. Now, at last, there was movement. She prayed it wasn't just another false hope. As investigators dug deeper, more details about the man whose name Emily had spoken came to light. He had left town abruptly, selling his house within months of Emily's disappearance. He had not stayed in touch with neighbors, and his departure had seemed sudden. People who once thought of him as friendly now recalled small things that had felt odd but had been overlooked at the time. It was as if the name had unlocked memories long buried. Linda was called in to answer questions, to provide any detail she could remember. Though the process was exhausting, she welcomed it. For 9 years, she had begged for someone to keep looking. Now that they were, she was ready to give every piece of herself to help. She replayed that recording so many times that she could hear Emily's voice in her dreams, guiding her, urging her not to stop. For Linda, the discovery of the old recorder was more than just evidence. It was a sign. She had always believed Emily was still with her in some way, watching over her. Finding that tape after all those years felt too important to be chance. It was as if Emily had hidden her message in the only way she could, leaving behind a breadcrumb for her mother to find when the time was right. As the investigation reopened, Linda allowed herself to feel something dangerous, something she had been afraid of for years: hope. Hope that the silence was ending. Hope that the truth, long buried in shadows, was finally beginning to come to light. She sat by Emily's bed one evening, the recorder in her hands again. She pressed play softly, listening to her daughter's voice whisper into the room. She whispered back, tears running down her face, "I hear you, baby. I hear you. I promise I won't stop until everyone else hears you too." The toy recorder, once just a child's plaything, had become the key to unlocking a mystery that had held Linda's life in its grip for nearly a decade. And though the path ahead was uncertain, Linda knew one thing for sure: Emily's voice had returned, and it would not be ignored again. The days that followed the discovery of the old recorder felt like a new beginning for Linda. For 9 years, her life had been a series of quiet, long days filled with unanswered questions. Now, after pressing play on that small toy, she felt a flicker of hope she had not dared to feel in nearly a decade. Every sound on that tape was a reminder that Emily's voice could still reach her, even after all this time. The police worked carefully, analyzing the tape over and over. With modern technology, they could clarify words that had been muffled, reduce background noise, and isolate Emily's whispering voice. The name she had mentioned became unmistakable, repeated with enough clarity to spark a new investigation. The man had been long forgotten by most in the neighborhood, his abrupt departure years ago considered merely a change of residence. But now, with Emily's recording in hand, the past began to open once again like a door that had been closed for far too long. Linda attended every meeting the police requested. She answered questions with patience, even though it was exhausting to revisit memories that had hurt her so deeply. She described Emily's habits, the way she laughed, the songs she loved, the nights she had played with her toy recorder. The detectives listened carefully, taking notes, cross-referencing old reports. It felt as if the entire investigation was alive again, Moving forward after years of stillness, detectives began retracing the man's steps from years ago. They checked old addresses, questioned people who had known him, and reviewed public records. Slowly, details began to form a clearer picture. They learned that he had moved out of town not long after Emily vanished, selling his home quickly. He had left little explanation for his sudden departure, and most neighbors at the time had accepted it as ordinary. But now, with Emily's name spoken on that tape, those small details took on new importance. Linda found herself both nervous and relieved. For nearly a decade, she had carried a weight of uncertainty. Every new lead was a mixture of excitement and fear. She knew that the truth could finally be within reach, yet part of her worried about what it might reveal. Would it confirm her fears? Or would it bring relief in ways she could hardly imagine? The police focused their investigation carefully. They examined old case files and compared notes from other similar cases in nearby towns. The goal was to find connections, however small, that might have been overlooked in the chaos of the initial search. For Linda, it was a strange sensation to see her daughter's case treated with urgency again. The quiet years of waiting had made her feel isolated, as if she alone remembered Emily. Now, she realized that her persistence, and the tape, had given the authorities something tangible to act on. Weeks passed as the investigation progressed. Detectives re-interviewed people from the neighborhood, hoping that someone would remember a detail from 9 years ago. Memories are tricky, Linda thought, but they can be powerful when something real brings them back. Each visit to the police station made her feel both anxious and hopeful. She clung to the thought that Emily's voice had chosen her mother to carry this message, and she would not let it go unheard. Meanwhile, Linda spent time in Emily's room, surrounded by the little girl's belongings. She would play the tape quietly, imagining Emily sitting on the floor, recording her thoughts and fears. The room felt alive again, as if the past and present were meeting in some small, magical way. Linda felt a sense of connection that had been missing for years. This tape was more than a clue, it was proof that her daughter had been trying to reach her, even if she could not be physically present. The detectives finally traced the man's current location. He had moved several times, but public records and interviews revealed a trail that eventually led them to a nearby town. Linda felt a mix of anticipation and unease. After 9 years, the thought of facing someone connected to Emily's disappearance was overwhelming. She tried to steady herself with the thought that the police would handle it carefully, that the investigation was in capable hands. As the officers prepared to follow the new lead, they asked Linda to review the details she remembered from the recording. Together, they listened again, noting the inflections in Emily's voice, the urgency and the fear she had expressed as a child. The detectives compared her words with old witness statements, searching for any correlation. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge, one that gave them enough reason to proceed. The first meeting with the man was arranged with care. Detectives approached the situation professionally, ensuring that all procedures were followed correctly. Linda was not present, but she felt every step keenly from a distance, her heart beating with a mixture of hope and dread. She imagined what it would be like to finally learn the truth, to know what had happened to her daughter. Over the next several days, evidence began to build. While nothing was rushed, the careful analysis of old records, new interviews, and the recording itself created a strong foundation for the investigation. The name on the tape had opened a door that had remained locked for years. Linda found herself holding her breath each time she received a phone call from the detectives, desperate for information but also trying to remain patient. The community began to take notice once again. Stories of the reopened investigation reached neighbors, some of whom remembered small events from 1991 that had seemed insignificant at the time. People came forward with recollections of the man's brief interactions with Emily, moments that had seemed ordinary but now felt crucial. Each story, each detail, brought Linda closer to understanding the mystery that had consumed her life for so long. Throughout this time, Linda found comfort in the recorder. She would play Emily's voice and speak softly into the empty room, telling her daughter that progress was being made, that she would never stop looking, that she loved her. The small toy had become a symbol of persistence and hope. It reminded Linda that even in silence, a voice can be heard when someone is truly listening. By the end of the month, the investigation had reached a turning point. The police had enough evidence to bring the man in for questioning. Linda was told to prepare herself, to stay strong. For 9 years, she had imagined this moment in her mind countless times. Now, it was about to happen. She clutched the recorder tightly and whispered a quiet promise to Emily, that she would never give up, that she would see this through, that her daughter's voice had finally been heard. The small town, once quiet and still, felt as if it were holding its breath. After nearly a decade of uncertainty, hope had returned in a way that was tangible, real, and powerful. Linda understood that the road ahead would not be easy, that there were more questions than answers, but she also knew that something extraordinary had happened. Emily had reached her through time and distance, and now, at last, the adults in her life were listening. Linda sat in Emily's room one evening, the familiar toys and drawings around her, holding the recorder as the cassette played softly. She closed her eyes and imagined her daughter smiling, knowing that her voice had not been ignored, that the long years of waiting were finally leading somewhere. A sense of purpose filled Linda's heart. She would continue to stand by, to provide every detail, every memory, every word that could help the investigation. She felt stronger than she had in years, driven by love and a determination that had not faded. For the first time in nearly a decade, Linda allowed herself to imagine a future in which answers might be found. The case, once cold and silent, was moving again. The man who had left the neighborhood and disappeared from view was finally within reach. And through it all, Emily's voice continued to guide her mother, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope can be found in the smallest of places. A child's whisper, preserved in a little toy, waiting to be heard. The days that followed the reopening of the investigation were tense and full of anticipation. For Linda, every phone call, every meeting with the police carried a mix of hope and nervousness. She had waited 9 long years for a breakthrough, and now the pieces were finally coming together. The small recorder that had sat forgotten in Emily's room had become the key to unlocking a truth that had been hidden for nearly a decade. Linda could hardly believe that her daughter's whispers, captured on a tiny toy, could have such a profound impact. Detectives worked carefully, following each lead to ensure nothing was overlooked. The man whose name Emily had spoken on the tape was located, and interviews were conducted in a calm and professional manner. Linda was not present during the questioning, but she felt every development keenly, as though her heart was in the room with the officers. Each time she heard from them, she clutched the recorder, imagining Emily guiding her, giving her the strength to continue. Finally, the investigation reached a turning point. Evidence collected from years ago, when combined with the new insights from the recorder, pointed clearly toward the truth. The police were able to piece together a timeline, reconstructing the events that had led to Emily's disappearance. Each small detail that had once seemed insignificant now held meaning. Linda listened carefully as the detectives explained what they had discovered. It was overwhelming, yet it brought relief. After years of silence, there was finally clarity. When the man was confronted with the evidence, the pieces of the mystery began to fall into place. Though the situation was complex, the investigation confirmed the importance of Emily's tape. Her voice, recorded as a child, had become a bridge between the past and the present. The officers were able to understand the truth more fully, and Linda felt a mixture of sorrow and relief. The uncertainty that had haunted her for nearly a decade was slowly giving way to answers. Linda finally allowed herself to visit Emily's room without the weight of fear pressing on her chest. She sat on the floor, surrounded by the toys and drawings that had remained untouched for 9 years. She pressed the recorder to her ear, listening to the voice of her daughter, small and brave, whispering words that had survived the passage of time. Linda spoke softly in return, telling Emily how proud she was, how much she loved her, and how she had never stopped searching. The community, too, began to respond. People who had once moved on from the case returned with kind words and support. Neighbors remembered Emily's laughter, her small acts of curiosity, and the way she had touched the lives of those around her. The story of the recorder, of a child's voice guiding a mother and the authorities toward truth, became a symbol of hope for the town. It reminded everyone that even the smallest details can hold tremendous significance. In the following weeks, the investigation continued with careful attention to every lead, ensuring that justice could be served. Linda remained patient, knowing that the process required time and diligence. She focused on her routines but carried the recorder with her everywhere, as though keeping it close would allow her to feel Emily's presence more strongly. It was a comfort and a reminder that her daughter's spirit had never truly left her. One evening, as the sun began to set, Linda sat by the window in Emily's room, the soft light casting gentle shadows across the floor. She held the recorder and listened to her daughter's voice, whispering words she had spoken long ago. The memories came rushing back: Emily's laughter, the way she had tilted her head when asking questions, the small moments of joy that had once filled the house. Linda realized that while the years of uncertainty had been painful, they had also strengthened her resolve. She had learned patience, perseverance, and the power of listening, even in the quietest moments. The final piece of the investigation was handled with care and professionalism. The authorities were able to confirm the details of what had happened, giving Linda the closure she had long sought. It was not the happy ending of a child returning home immediately, but it was a resolution that brought understanding and a sense of peace. The truth had been uncovered, and for Linda, that was enough. She had always hoped for answers, and now she had them. As she returned home one evening, Linda placed the recorder carefully on the shelf, next to Emily's stuffed bunny. She looked around the room, her eyes taking in every detail, every small object that carried a memory of her daughter. She whispered a quiet thank you to Emily, grateful that her child's voice had been strong enough to guide her toward the truth. The room, once frozen in time, now felt like a place where hope could grow again. Linda also began to share the story with those closest to her, the people who had supported her through the years. She spoke of the recorder, of the whispers, and of the moment she realized that Emily's voice had survived. Friends and family listened in awe, moved by the resilience of a small child's message and the determination of a mother who refused to give up. The story became a testament to love, patience, and the unexpected ways in which answers can be found. Though the journey had been long and filled with uncertainty, Linda felt a deep sense of closure. The recorder, once a simple toy, had become a symbol of hope, a bridge that connected past and present. She understood that while Emily's absence was still felt, her daughter's voice had never truly left her. It had guided, comforted, and ultimately helped uncover the truth. Linda continued to live her life with care, cherishing each memory of Emily. She visited the places they had once gone together, she told stories about Emily to those who would listen, and she kept the recorder close, a reminder of the extraordinary role it had played in their lives. The quiet strength that had sustained her for 9 years now allowed her to embrace life with renewed hope, knowing that truth and love can survive even the longest periods of silence. In the end, the story of Emily's disappearance became not only a tale of mystery but also one of courage and perseverance. Linda's dedication, the careful work of the authorities, and the tiny recorder that had preserved a child's voice combined to bring resolution. It was a reminder that even when hope seems lost, persistence and love can illuminate the path to understanding. And so, in that small town, Emily's voice continued to echo in her mother's heart. It was a quiet but powerful presence, reminding Linda every day that love, attention, and faith can overcome years of uncertainty. The truth had been found, and though the journey had been long, it was proof that a mother's hope and a child's courage can create extraordinary outcomes, even in the most ordinary places. Linda would never stop cherishing the memories of her daughter, and the recorder remained a symbol of connection, resilience, and the enduring power of a small voice that refused to be forgotten. Through patience, hope, and unwavering love, the story that began in silence had finally reached a conclusion, allowing both mother and community to find peace and understanding after nearly a decade of waiting.